What's happening, guys? Oxford here, and welcome to this Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree build guide. This is going to be for the Ash of War called the Poison Flower Blooms Twice. This is probably one of my most heavy-hitting builds, probably the most broken and most powerful build that I have used to date. And I'm excited to share this build with you guys. Where do you get this Ash of War? Go ahead and open up your map, navigate to the top left corner of your map, northwest area, and if you see where the sword is, this is going to be where it drops at. It drops one of the silver scarabs just sitting in some water. I'll show you some footage here in a second. Kill that, it'll drop the Ash of War. Thankfully, there is a site of grace right across the water, okay? So here is the site of grace called Ravine North. That's where you're going to head. And then once you're there, just go right across the water and you're going to get that drop. Now, here is some video footage of what that looks like. It looks just like this here. And this is what the scenery looks like. You're going to walk across that water or right across that water. And you're going to see right there, boom, that's a good shot of it right there. There's that scarab sitting in that little puddle of rot. And then you're going to see Ash of War, the poison flower blooms twice. That's where you're going to get that drop from, okay? The one thing that I want to talk about here is if you open up your menu and you look at what the skill says at the bottom of your screen, it says the skill conjures stingers of scarlet rot from below to stab the enemy, landing a follow-up attack on a foe already inflicted with poison or rot, deals massive damage in one fell swoop. So the way this is read or understood is the following. You want to first do one of two things. You're going to want to poison and or apply rot to an enemy first, and then you'll hit your L2 and you do a dive kick like that, which does like this burst or explosion of rot damage, okay? And what you're essentially doing is you're gonna basically do like it's almost like a bleed proc. So imagine you having a bleed build and then you have this, and you can just be basically just taking chunks of life away. So the way I built this was the following. I added the Scavenger's curved swords to my setup. I added 2 of them. And in my left hand, I made this one a Scavenger's blood curved sword plus 25. And here I added Poisonous Mist, which I do end up using throughout the footage that you're watching on screen. So basically you hold your left weapon with 2 hands to go ahead and use the Poisonous Mist. Like the following here, you'll have this like that. You hit your L2, then it does your Poisonous Mist like so, okay? And then go back to dual wielding. That way you now have a poison weapon, your base poison weapon in your right hand, and then you have the poison of the Ash of War in your left. So when you're hitting L1, you're actually causing the poison buildup even faster because you're doubling down on the poison buildup. Does that make sense? But at the same time, you're also applying bleed. So you're getting the bleed procs. Now, once the enemy is poisoned, what I tend to do is I back up and I hit L2 with the main weapon to do a dive kick. Now, here's the thing. Once you do this, you sort of I'm going to call it cashing out. Okay, let's call it cash out. What does that mean? That means that the poison that's being built up, like the damage over time, the dot damage, you'll see it ticking down, right? Well, as soon as you hit the L2, and if you connect with the enemy, because sometimes you'll miss your dive kick, which kind of gets annoying. But when you connect, you'll do a massive amounts of damage, big proc, but you're cashing out, meaning the dot damage is no longer being applied. So it's kind of like, your choice, like no pun intended, but pick your poison. Do you want the dot damage to tick down, or would you rather go in for a big one fell swoop and do a big proc, right? The procking is a lot of fun. So this is kind of what I've done with the setup. All right, let me go ahead and showcase how I use this build. The first thing I do is I apply the Poison Mist just like that. And I usually go in with a running L1 or a jumping L1. And I wait for that the poison to proc. Let's see, let's get this poison to get going. So now the poison's there. Now watch this. Let's get this guy out here. Let's get him out here. Now, what I'm going to do is sit here and do an L2. You see how I missed? The poison's still there. I'm going to leave that in the video so you can see that can happen. Now watch. I'm going to hit the L2 and let's see if it hits. You see how that procced? And now the poison is gone. I cashed in, like I said before. You kind of cash in. Okay, here's another test that I want to show real quick is we're going to do a dive kick just by itself with no poison with Shard of Alexander. No buffs or anything. I don't have any buffs or anything like that. No spells, no incantations, nothing. So if we lock on and we have the Shard of Alexander here, let's do an L2 and let's see what we get. 2455. Now, let's remove that. Now let's see what we get. Hopefully he doesn't block me. Now let's see. 189. Hold on. 2341. And if you noticed, it applied rot. Did you see that? So 2 dive kicks will apply rot. So keep that in mind. Okay? And if you want to take it a step further, you can actually get poison and rot at the same time. And let's see if we can't get a dive kick in. So I cashed out, even though it didn't hit him very hard. You see what I'm saying? See, 1 hit, didn't get the rot. This will kill him. He blocked. He blocked again, but he's poisoned. He's got rot on. You see what I'm saying? So it does apply rot. Let's talk about the talisman. I'm using the Dragon Community Seal +10 because this is a somewhat of a faith build, but it's more of an arcane, and I'll go over the attributes in just a second. Now, the headpiece here is a mushroom crown, and for those that don't know, if you wear this, which looks absolutely fashionable, right? This is raised attack power when something nearby suffers from poison or rot. A lot of you guys already know this. And then the rest of the gear is completely up to you. And my recommendation, I would keep your poise. If you look off to the far right of your screen, keep that poise above or at or above 51 so that when you do your dive kick, you're not going to be interrupted. It may have hyper armor. I'm not sure because I've only had higher than 51 poise. So someone, if you're watching this, does it have hyper armor? Yes or no? Drop a comment. But what I did was I just rocked the armor of Solitude, the whole Solitude gear set. That's what I've done. But you do whatever you'd like. As far as the talismans go, we're rocking Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman, Rotten Winged Swords Insignia, because what I'm showcasing here in this video is the dual Scavenger's Blade, so this comes in really handy. The Kindred of Rot's Exaltation is huge. This actually couples up with the Mushroom Crown, so it does stack. Now, let's talk about this 4th slot, and why do I have Lord of Blood's Exaltation? You can actually do one of the following, and I actually do bounce between the two. I don't always use Lord of the Blood's Exaltation, okay? Because there's some fights, like the final boss fight in the DLC, where it's really hard to pull up that dive kick. Sometimes I couldn't pull it off at all, so I didn't even bother with the dive kick in the final boss fight. But you can do it. So I went with Lord of Blood's Exaltation for that extra bleed damage because of the swords. But if you don't want to do that, my recommendation, probably my #1 recommendation over the Lord of Blood's Exaltation is, of course, the Shard of Alexander Talisman. I would probably go with this one because you're going to be doing that L2 quite a bit on the dive kick. As far as the flask goes, I mean, this is totally up to your play style. I'm rocking a 13-1. The Flask of Wonders Physic, I'm doing Opaline Hearts here for that extra defense. This is New Game +11. I don't know if I mentioned that yet in this video, but this is New Game +11. Actually, this is New Game +12. But we all know the scaling stops at New Game +7, but I just kept going. And then Thorny Cracked Tear for the temporarily boost successful attack power. Again, that's only because of the weapons that I'm using. So adjust accordingly to what weapons you're using. I hardly ever use the Boiled Prawn, truth be told, but it is there in case I need it. I do like to use Bestial Vitality, which requires 12 Faith. I also really like Black Flame's Protection. This lasts a really long time, so this is 30 Faith. Golden Vow, I love this one. Gets the extra damage, extra defense, why not? 25 Faith. Finally, we have Flame, Grant Me Strength, which is a Faith of 15 requirement. Some tips here that I want to show you, or I want to talk about, is whenever you're using these weapons, and if you don't like use these weapons, I mean, there's so many choices here. Anything with bleed on it, just add some poison to it and get the dive kick going, you'll be good to go. Another set of weapons here that would complement pretty well are the 2 rapiers here. I've also used those right here, the Anspur rapiers, +25s, poison and bleed. Those are actually a really good combination, so you can do that as well. You can actually do 2 katanas if you want to. If you want to do the katanas, you can do whatever you want to do. All right, it's fun no matter what weapons you choose. You can even do like the great katanas. I've seen people do that before, but for me, and also this, you can try the backhand blades if you want to do so, but you won't get the bleed proc. With the backhand blade, you'll be getting your poison up pretty fast with the backhand blade, and then you can do the dive kick after that. So if you don't want to have bleed at all, and you just want to go straight poison, and you want to do that rot dive kick, go with these, because I actually kind of prefer these anyway, because they actually apply the the poison a little bit faster. But you know, with the scavengers, I felt like getting all 3 of the procs was pretty fun. And I do have some footage where I was killing Rolana for the very first time in New Game Plus 12. It was absolutely mind-blowing, and the Dancing Lion as well. Killed him on the first try. It's a really fun build. So let's go ahead and take a look at the stats. I am level 320. Like I said before, this is New Game Plus 12, and I just kept going. Going down to the stats here, remember this is the Godric Great Rune, so all these are going to be +5, but if you're not using a Great Rune at all, you're going to have, at this level, I went with 80 Vigor, and then you're going to have 35 Mind, 40 Endurance, 62 Strength, and then you're going to have 63 Dexterity, and then I have the base 9 Intelligence, and then 30 Faith, and then 80 Arcane. That's pretty much the setup. Okay, so if I were RL 150, I would definitely have 60 Vigor, especially in the DLC. I just can't recommend going below, unless you're trying to squeeze out some damage. I don't know. I feel like 60 Vigor is probably the best for the DLC. The Mind, this was a toss-up. It was very challenging for me to make a 150 build here for this video. It was challenging because I like to have a lot of FP, especially for this build where you have Poison Mist and you're using the Dive Kick. So you'll have to play around with that. But for 150, I stuck with 20 Mind. But if you feel like you need a little bit more, pump in 25 to 30. Completely up to you. Another thing, too, is Endurance. You know, you're going to be swinging a lot, dodging a lot, all that stuff. If you want to wear heavier gear, you know, keep all that stuff in mind. But because 150, it's very challenging to build around this. You know, I came up with 25 Endurance, but again, totally up to you. For the weapons, this is actually the scavengers that you saw here in the video. So you're going to have to tailor your strength and dexterity on the weapons that you are using, because you may be doing something else entirely different than me. So just kind of allocate your strength and dexterity according to what you're using. Now, the Faith, I didn't pump any Faith into the 150. So if you're going to be using any of the spells, you're going to need at least a minimum of 30. If not, you'll need a minimum of 12. So play around with this if you want to have 12. So you could probably do, you know, lower the Arcane to 45 and then pump in maybe 12, maybe 46 Arcane. You know, it's entirely up to you, but play around with this. The reason to have this 46 or 45 Arcane is because your poison and your bleed, if you're going to go that route with the bleed, it's going to be scaling off of that, especially if you're going to do any weapon that scales with Arcane. So you got to keep that in mind as well. I do know that the Arcane really starts to get fun around the 60 mark, 60, 70, 80. That's where the fun happens. But because we're being challenged with 150, it's kind of hard to do that. But play around with this. I think out of this this section here, definitely the 60 Vigor is a staple. From there, play around with the numbers to meet your 150 requirements, okay? For RL 200, I did bump the Vigor up from 60 to 70 for RL 200. That's entirely optional. I mean, all this is optional when you think about it. But I feel like a lot of health is really a necessity. I wouldn't go over 80. There was a time where I would rock 99 Vigor on the higher 300 levels, but 80 is plenty. But for 200, I would go with 70. With Mind, I did bump this up to 25. Again, completely subjective, because you will be doing a lot of dive kicks. You'll be doing a lot of poison mist. So keep that in mind with the FP. I did bump up the endurance to 30 for RL 200, because I feel like when you're swinging your weapons a lot, you're dodging, you want to wear heavier gear, all that factors in. So I would bump up the endurance, in my humble opinion. The strength and dexterity, if you're using the scavenger curve blades, 36, 37. If you're using something else, make adjustments according to what your build is. Here's your minimum 12 faith. This should get you most of the things that are in this video. The only two ones are going to be the Vow spell and the Protect spell. That one's going to be 25 and 30 faith. So if you really want that extra damage, I would bump up this faith to 30. And then we're already past 200, so I would probably lower the Arcane down to 50 and maybe even lower the Mind down to 20, maybe even the Vigor down to 65, and kind of go with the 200 part. If you're trying to get the faith to 30, to get you the other two spells that I use on my 300 build. Does that make sense? For RL 250, I would put the Vigor at 80 and then the Mind at 25. Again, be mindful of how much you're using the dive kick and how much you're using the poison mist, so keep that in mind. Endurance is around 30. Strength, dexterity, again, if you're using the scavenger blades, 47 and 48 respectively. But whatever weapons you're using, make adjustments to your style of gameplay. Intelligence is at 9. Faith, I do like to have it at 30 here if you want to use those extra incantations for those buffs. And then finally, we have Arcane at 60. If you feel like you want to have more Arcane to get the poison going a little bit faster, the bleed procs happening faster, or if your weapons scale with Arcane, then I would bump this to 70 and then play around with your strength and dexterity, but that's entirely optional. If you like where this is at or you like how things are proccing, leave it at 60. Just know that Rot does not use Arcane for proccing. Rot is kind of like Frost in a way where it's kind of its own thing and it just procs and hits and ticks off based off of that one ailment. So again, it's almost like Frost. Frost just procs based off of just Frost alone, doesn't really have anything that scales with it other than, intelligence, but you know what I mean, right? So like it's going to proc based off of that one, that one ability. So whereas poison and bleed are going to lean on Arcane. Thanks for watching, guys. Y'all take it easy.